A family goes on a peach furry collecting spree, preparing to trap a housekeeper. While the housekeeper was walking her dog, scattered the hairs on her body. The housekeeper became allergic to it. The father followed the housekeeper to the hospital. He took a photo of her and showed it to the lady of the house, falsely accusing the housekeeper of having a serious infection. But the housekeeper had been in the family for over 10 years. More than 10 years. And this alone could not affect her position. So before the mistress returned home, the daughter once again sprinkled peach feathers on the housekeeper again. When the mistress returned home, she saw the housekeeper having an attack. The father again put ketchup, squeezed it onto the housekeeper's paper. Then he took out the ball of paper and showed it to the mistress. The mistress fainted, and so the housekeeper is fired. The position was successfully taken by someone else. It turned out that the family had been living in a dark, damp basement. The family's only source of income was origami boxes. With the meager income, the family barely survived in the basement until a classmate of their son Kiwoo comes to visit. He came to introduce Kiwoo to a tutoring job. It turned out that during his tenure he had fallen in love with a student. He was afraid that when he went for further studies, someone would take advantage of him. So he asked Kiwoo to cover his classes. When he heard that he had a good offer, Kiwoo immediately agreed to do it. Kiwoo has no diploma and no experience. How could he possibly do it? A classmate suddenly said he could just do one. It just so happened that Kiwoo's sister, Keating, is very good at PS. It didn't take more than a few minutes, and she made a famous university diploma, a prestigious graduation certificate. Plus it was a referral from a previous teacher. Kiwoo successfully passed the interview. During the tutor's lesson, the girl kept staring at Kiwoo from time to time. Her mind was not on her studies at all. When Kiwoo returned home from the tutoring session, he had a conversation with his hostess, Mrs. Park. He got a very important piece of information. It turned out that Mrs. Park's son was very naughty. He had driven away dozens of art teachers. When Kiwoo heard this, he thought of his sister, so he lies that he had a very good schoolmate. She was good at drawing and psychology. Mrs. Park was instantly intrigued. The next morning, Kiwoo brought his sister to the house. After matching the code at the door and ringing the doorbell, Kijong's cool demeanor, with her excellent drawing skills, and from a painting, I knew that Mrs. Park's son was stimulated at the age of 1. Kijong's ability. Mrs. Park was overwhelmed by her ability. Kijong passed the interview. Kiwoo broke his promise to his classmate. He succeeds in getting together with the girl, but the two siblings are not satisfied with their ambitions. They plan to get their parents to come to work with them, so they turn their attention to the driver. That night the driver takes Kijong home, so Keating secretly put a pair of her panties in the back, a pair of her own pants in the back. The next day, Mr. Park found it in the car. He fired the driver that night. Later, while talking to Mrs. Park, Kijong accidentally said that her uncle was a veteran driver. Now he happens to be unemployed. The old lady was overjoyed. This was a great solution to the problem of having no driver in the family. The next day Kiwoo took her father to the 4S shop. He memorized all the features of the luxury car, skilled in driving, plus his father had 30 years of experience with trucks. He made a sharp turn and didn't lose a drop of coffee in his cup. This made Mr. Park very happy. Then they pointed the finger at the housekeeper. But the housekeeper had been working for decades. It's not easy to get rid of her. Kiwoo learns that the housekeeper is allergic to peach fuzz, which can lead to tuberculosis. So the family set out to frame the housekeeper. They put the hairy peaches on the housekeeper. The father then squeezes ketchup on the paper ball. The housekeeper is successfully fired. Kiwoo then recommends a housekeeping company. Kijong then impersonates Mr. Park and speaks to him, and so the mother succeeds in getting the job done. But the four of them cover up their identities, but they couldn't hide the smell because of the long time they lived in the basement. The family there was always a bad smell. They couldn't wash it off. This day, Mr. Park's son smelled Kiwoo's father's smell, and then he smelled his mother's body and said, "They smell exactly the same as Mr. Kijong." They smelled exactly the same. Luckily, Mr. and Mrs. Park didn't worry about it. That's how the crisis was averted. A few days later, the family went on a trip. With the family gone, the villa became the Kiwoo family's. They enjoyed the bath, sofas, the lawn, enjoying all that the Park family has to offer. In the evening the family was slightly drunk. When the doorbell suddenly rings, mother goes to check it out. It turned out to be the previous housekeeper. He asked Kiwoo's mother to come in and get something. He took it and left immediately. The mother didn't think twice about letting him in, but he came in and went straight to the corner. His mother followed him, only to find that there was a hidden fortress behind the cellar. The housekeeper had hidden her husband in here. Then the housekeeper took money. She tried to bribe Kiwoo's mother to keep him from telling the Park family, and to give Kiwoo's mother money every month so that she would provide food every day for her husband. But not only did Kiwoo's mother not agree, she also told the Park family. Suddenly, 3 people fell out. The housekeeper instantly understood everything. She took out her mobile phone to shoot a video, and so the positions of the 2 parties changed. The housekeeper and her husband were lying on the sofa, and Kiwoo's family was cowering in the corner. Finally, the father couldn't take it anymore. He rushed up to take the phone, and so the 6 men began to fight over the phone. That's when the phone suddenly rang. It turns out that the Park family is coming back. They asked the nanny to cook some noodles, so the mother started to cook noodles without any fuss. The housekeeper was thrown into the corner. Her husband was also tied up. When the owner returned, the house was just about finished. The 3 men who hadn't escaped hid under the coffee table. That's when Mr. Park smelled a bad smell. He and his wife said it was the same as the driver's smell. The smell was very unpleasant and pungent. This smell can only be smelt on the underground. And Mr. Park's casual remarks, but it hurt Kiwoo's father's pride. After the Park family had fallen asleep, the 3 of them finally escaped from the villa. It was raining heavily. The house was flooded. The rain had destroyed their home. They had no choice but to go and live in a rescue shelter. Soon Mrs. Park's son's birthday came. The Park family invited many distinguished guests. A big birthday party was thrown. Kiwoo looked down at the party. He knew he couldn't lose what was in front of him, so he turned around and went to the cellar, preparing to kill the housekeeper and her husband. Just as Kiwoo was about to strike, the iron ring behind him hooked him. It turned out to be the housekeeper's husband. The housekeeper had bled to death. In a panic, Kiwoo broke free. He ran towards the top, and he was pulled back. The housekeeper's husband smashed his head in. Kiwoo was unconscious on the spot. Then he grabbed a knife and went outside. He rushed towards Keating and slashed him. Then he aimed at Kiwoo's mother, but the mother managed to kill him back. Mrs. Park's son passed out as a result. Mr. Park told Kiwoo's father to get the keys to the car, but the father is overwhelmed by the suddenness of the accident. He looked on dumbfounded at what was happening. Mr. Park had no choice. He had no choice but to get the keys himself. And once again, he had an unpleasant look on his face. He looked as if he was picking up rubbish from a rubbish dump. This scene also stung his father's heart. He got up and grabbed a knife and stabbed Mr. Park in the face. Mrs. Park was frozen in fear. After the incident, Ki-jong and Mr. Park died. Kiwoo's father disappeared. Kiwoo and his mother were given suspended sentences. That day Kiwoo went to the top of the hill. He took out his binoculars to look at the villa. He accidentally saw a light from under the cellar. He realized that his father was hiding in the cellar. He lived in it like a parasite. Whenever the owner of the house was not home or asleep, he dared to come out to find something to eat. Kiwoo vowed that he would make lots and lots of money and buy this house so that his father could see the light of day again. But then the camera turns. Drizzle is still in the basement. And that's the end of the film. On the one hand, the flooded room, a birthday party on one side. On the one hand, a cold, hard help station. On one side, a luxuriously soft back garden. Money is the iron. It flattens everything out. They dabble in the internet and live in the basement. They'll do anything to get a job. Just when you think they've had enough, the film suddenly turns around. If you're rich, there must be someone richer than you. If you're poor, there's always someone poorer than you. The gap between rich and poor is like a million walls, dividing people into 3, 6 and 9 classes. This wall will not let. The wall stands firm in the wind, the sun and the rain. The Parkers look foolish, but they are getting richer and richer. Kiwoo and his family were smart enough, but they can't get ahead. Kiwoo's family thought that by getting a good job, with a good salary, they thought they could get rid of their poverty status, but they're still 100,000 miles away. They could wash the smell off their bodies, but they couldn't wash away the smell of the basement. The smell of the basement was in their blood. They're worms. They've had a hard life, so nothing can kill them either.